Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to talk to you about the Hague Convention on the recognition of trusts and their applicability. Before we get into this, as always, if you haven't already, click the subscribe button. We definitely like subscribers. They're our favorite people. Click the notification bell. I hope you're doing great, and let's jump into this subject. Okay, so there's a variety of international treaties, and one of them from, I think it's 1985, 1984, 1985, something like that, is what's called the Hague Convention on the recognition of trusts and their applicability. I'm going to give you a little background on what this is, why it would matter to you, and how this affects some of the trust planning that we do, even in situations where often you wouldn't, maybe consider it. So this comes up from the fact that I think people kind of default to certain, I don't know, it's almost like what I would call media bias, right? So media is maybe not the right term, but you get a lot of public, like if you go on Google, it's kind of like back in the day when I knew nothing about offshore in like 2000, 2001 or whatever, and I would go in Google and it's like people were talking about BVI and Seychelles, right? And there's like whole articles that people are writing on why Seychelles is the best or why BVI is the best or why whatever is the best, right? And I get this a lot from trust jurisdictions as well. People are like, oh, Cook Islands is the best, Nevis is the best, this is the best, and they all have their little perspective on why it is that they think that. But they don't necessarily consider that these scenarios are unique to them. And so, for instance, I was working with a client a few months ago, and they were in a particular situation where they were doing some business and there's some assets in Netherlands, okay? And so you have to consider Dutch law. You have to consider kind of choice of law and how these different things are going to apply in your situation. And this does not necessarily, so there's just no one size fits all, right? You have to look at all the variables and you have to put the variables together and then figure out based on that what is the best solution. So let's talk about the Hague Convention. Okay, so the Hague Convention basically worked like this. Wealthy families around the world put their assets into trust, okay? Lots of different reasons for this, largely inheritance, but sometimes to do with tax and other different factors, okay? So over a period of time, billions of dollars, probably, I don't know how much, but very large amounts of money ended up in trusts in various different parts of the world, okay? And the world, various different countries, would like to attract that money as investment into the country, into their countries, right? It's in their best interest to be able to attract this investment. But these trust managers would say, hey, listen, we don't want to invest into your country because we don't know how this trust is going to, like, you don't have rules to deal with this situation. So how is it going to get addressed, right? And so this gave rise to the Hague Convention. And the Hague Convention, loosely speaking, it's a very simple convention, but for the signatories, there's a pretty limited number of signatories. So notably, Cook Islands is not on there, Nevis is not on there, etc. Okay? These countries that are on there, loosely, and I'm oversimplifying it slightly, but loosely the idea was that if that trust operates in our jurisdiction, we agree to recognize that jurisdiction's rules with respect to that trust. Okay, that's kind of the basic gist of it. Now, lots of technicalities around how this works. Okay, first of all, yeah, all right, this is a good thing, and what this means is that it gives you some clarity when you're dealing in another country with a trust. And this is a part of the thing that you want, right? Like, you don't want to be in a situation where you go to court and you have no idea what's going to happen. This is very risky, right? This is horrible. This is one of the reasons why Delaware is considered to be a good jurisdiction to form companies, is because they have a lot of case law that tells you pretty clearly what's going to happen. You can go and look at some of these places. Their statutes might be unclear, then there's a lack of case law, and things just start stacking on top of each other. So when people come to me and they mention some new piece of law or it's like, well, you don't really know how that's going to play out. You can get legal opinions that say it's going to play out this way, but a legal opinion is not necessarily worth anything if there's another legal opinion that says the opposite and there's no case law to base it on, or the statute isn't clear, okay? So that's something to be aware of. So here this helps a lot if you're doing this planning. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons that I'll often, there's a few different reasons that I'll often use BVI trusts today. And it's funny because people would talk a lot about BVI companies, but I don't hear a lot about BVI trusts. BVI has some quite compelling rules around trusts in the modern day, okay? So there's a bunch of reasons why it can keep our costs lower, and it can give us some clarity because of the Hague Convention. So not always, right? Definitely, there's no one size fits all. There's probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 jurisdictions that we'll consider using for trusts in the majority of cases. and so BVI is just one of them. But anyway, so in this particular case, let's say that you have a setup where you're like, okay, let's just say, for instance, a BVI trust, and you're going to do some business or some investing in Netherlands. Okay, so you've got some assets in Netherlands, and your objective there is to try and to achieve this. Now, this is well and good up to a certain point. Okay, the practical reality is that you do still have choice of law that's going to come into play with respect to given assets, with respect to the parties who are involved, etc. And I think I've talked about this before in some previous videos. We saw this happen in the US. There was a fairly noteworthy case. I think that one of the parties was in Washington State, one was somewhere else, and I think the trust was based in Alaska. And the courts decided to disregard Alaskan law because it basically had nothing to do with Alaska, right? So, so there are pieces you have to fit in together into what is happening here. If you have a piece of real estate in, let's say, a Turks and Caicos trust, but that piece of real estate is in France, well, just because it's there doesn't mean that they're going to say, hey, listen, we're going to disregard French law. No, like the property is in France, right? So there's a high likelihood that they're going to use French law there. But with respect to certain disputes around who it is that that the parties of the trust are, et cetera, you can have a lot more clarity, and that can be much more helpful. So anyway, bottom line of all this is, as I've mentioned in some other cases, international law trumps domestic law in a high degree of situations. Okay, so this is very useful, and this is one of the cases is through the Hague Convention. Okay, it's quite an unusual piece of treaty, and it can be something that's really useful for you if you're dealing with multiple jurisdictions and doing planning, either from an asset protection standpoint, a tax standpoint, even just in terms of like some sort of fiduciary roles or agreements, transferring of assets, etc. And as a result, it's something that if you're doing that kind of planning, you should definitely be aware of, and you should definitely be looking at to say, hey, is this going to be relevant to me? What can I do to optimize my costs? What can I do to optimize the ease of how things are going, to increase the confidence in terms of if it goes to court and there needs to be some sort of a dispute, how it's going to get resolved, etc., etc. Anyway, if you want help with any of that stuff, if you're doing asset protection, if you're doing tax planning, if you're interested in residencies or citizenships or forming companies and trusts and bank accounts and payment processing, etc., click the link below, clarity.fm/Michael Rosmer to book a call with me, or check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com. Click the subscribe button. It makes people very lucky. It's a very good thing. Wonderful. It's great. It's the best subscribe button. Click the notification bell. Click the like. If you have questions or comments, please put them below. Check out our other videos, and I'm going to see you guys on the next video.